So Dan, like I mentioned, comes to us from the panhandle of Idaho near the Canadian border, and he's been teaching the Bible and was the CEO, right, of Spirit and Truth Fellowship for 18 years, and has a lot of experience in evangelism and discipleship and Bible study and research. And so I'd like to welcome Dan up to share with us this morning.
Thank you. Sean asked me to speak today on practicing the presence of God. And the story about the deer is true. I did kill a deer a couple weeks ago on a motorcycle. And it just reminded me, thank you, Sean, of how much I need the presence of God in my life. Because going 40 miles an hour down a country road and just fellowshipping with God, and I saw deer and hit it that fast. And at 40 miles an hour, most people don't walk away from it, but not only did I walk away from it, I was able to limp my motorcycle home. It turned out that it was totaled, the deer, and my bike too. But when I took it down to the dealership and I turned it in, the gal who was checking me in, she said, "Wow, the same thing happened to that bike right there." And I thought, wow. I said, "Did he walk away?" And she said, "No, he's injured." And she said, "And last week there was a guy in here who hit a black bear." So that's Idaho. It's the second time I've intersected with a deer on a motorcycle. And I have another bike, and I'm seriously thinking putting it up for sale because I don't want to tempt God anymore. But I want to talk today about practicing the presence of God, because I think when we talk about walking by the Spirit, this to me is the chewy caramel center. This to me is where the rubber meets the road. God made us so that we could dwell in His presence. And it's in God's presence that we literally experience God. I want God in my life. I want as much God as I can have in my life. And so I was thinking about this, practicing the presence of God. Well, if I break that down, if I said to someone, now I come from a construction background, I'm a carpenter by trade, and if I said, "Hey John, go cut me a hip jack," and if John didn't have any idea what I was talking about, he'd go, "A hip? Or a jack like a car?" You know, but that happens to be a type of a rafter on a roof, right? For those of the carpenters out here know that. If I said, "Hey, hit a homer," if you're a baseball fan, you know what that means, right? We don't have to break that down. What does it mean to practice the presence of God? There's two parts to me. Number one, we've got to know what it means to be in the presence of God. And then number two, we have to know how to practice it. So who can think of an example from the Bible of someone who experienced the presence of God? Abraham, that's good. Remember Moses? What was Moses' first experience with the presence of God? A burning bush. And what did God say? "Take off those shoes. You've got sheep dung on them, boy." Right? That's not going to enter into my presence because the ground is holy. And that's exactly what Bill was talking about. The ground is separate. It's set apart because I'm a holy God. I'm a separate God. I'm set apart. And so for Moses to enter into the presence of God, Moses had to drop his the thing that was most connected to the earth, which was his sandals, and then he was able to at least experience to some degree God. Where's other examples? So first of all, we know God is holy. Bill shared that very well this morning. I love that. And the second thing that I was thinking about is the presence of God is majestic. There's majesty within the presence of God. You know, today we've lost a touch with majesty. There used to be a time where there was royalty. You know, about the most we have with that is the president, and then it depends on what party you're in, whether you think he's majestic or not. But whatever the case may be, we honor the position they hold, even if you don't like the individual who's holding it. And I'm not talking any politics here, believe me. But we've lost touch with majesty a lot today. We've lost touch with royalty. I have always said for years that I would bet if an angel showed up for most people, they'd go, whoa, dude, that is cool, you know? But you read the Bible, what happens? They fall to their face. They're just struck, dumbstruck, because of the glory, the majesty. And there's a record here that I'd like to turn to in Isaiah. Let me get my glasses out. Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1. And I'd just like to read this, verse 1 through 7, because I want to get in touch with the presence of God, because I want to practice the presence of God in my life. And in chapter 6, verse 1, it says, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw Yahweh, the Lord, sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple." That's majesty. First of all, he was sitting on a throne. The throne is a seat of power and authority. It was always elevated. I don't know if you remember the record of Solomon, where just what Solomon did. You know, here's this earthly king, and he had lions and steps and a throne. And here's God sitting high on a throne. And he's lifted up. And the train of his robe, and I never understood that, so I Googled it the other day. And I said, what does that mean, the train of his robe? And the best example that I found was, you know how we have brides and they have the veil? And you guys remember, like, you know, showing my age here, Princess Di, when she got married, you know, Diana in the UK, and the robe, that was like 30, the train was 30 feet long, and people had to carry it. And that's what these kings used to do. They used to have these long robes, and people, because it showed their authority. And here's God with the train of his robe, the back of it, and it fills the temple. It's just, it's a picture I can't even, it's hard to relate to. But there's majesty in the presence of God. And he goes on and he says, in verse 3, "And one called to another," these creatures that fly around, "Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh, is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called. The house was filled with smoke. And I said, woe is me, for I am lost. I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." There's majesty in the presence of God. And if I'm going to practice the presence of God, I've got to get in touch with that majesty, with that power. Holy, holy, holy. Three holies, meaning complete, right? Completely, absolutely holy. Another thing I was thinking about is, what does it mean to be in the presence of God, is in Leviticus chapter 9. And I'd like to read verses 22 through 24. And it says, "Then Aaron lifted up his hands towards the people and blessed them. And he came down from offering the sin offering and the burnt offering and the peace offerings. And Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting. And when they came out, they blessed the people. And the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people." I believe it was called the Shekinah glory. The glory of the Lord. The glory that came down over that tabernacle. It's just, it was consuming. I've been around a lot of powerful things. I've been around a lot of situations where there's big fires. And when I was younger, I was in a volunteer fire department when I was 18 to 20. And I remember rolling up on a couple house fires. And we couldn't even get within 20 feet of the house because the house was so consumed with, you know, do you remember in Daniel where they heated the fire, 7 times greater? And what did the guys do that carried them up? They died. That's just fire. That's just earthly fire. And so here, these people see the glory of God, and fire comes out from the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the pieces of fat on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and they fell on their faces. And this is what happened with Gideon. This is what Sean is talking about. It was the glory of God, the fire from the throne of God that came down, and that's going to knock them on their feet. And they're going to say, Yahweh's God, right? So that, to me, is a little bit of what it is to be in the presence of God, to practice the presence of God. But yet, how do I do that? Well, first of all, I don't want to take it for granted. You know, we know, and many of us know experientially, that God's Spirit dwells in us. Yet I take it for granted all the time. And I think in terms of something that has related for me in my mind is an electrical transformer. I'm sure you've driven by those yards where they have a series of transformers, big power converters, and it's all the energy comes off the dams and gets converted and then sent out. And you can hear them hum. You can almost feel the power in the air. There's times where they say, you know, the static electricity in the air, you know, the hair on your arm can stand up. So God's presence is holy. It's separated from us. God, or from man in general. It's also majestic. It's also powerful. And it's also should be fearsome to some degree. Since we're in Leviticus, let's just look at 10. Chapter 10, verse 1. Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it, and laid incense on it, and offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And the fire came out from before the Lord and did what? Consumed them. And they died before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Lord has said. Now these are his sons who just died. And Moses says to Aaron, among those who are near me, I will be sanctified. I will be separate. I will be. And before all the people, I will be glorified. So I have to have a sense of holiness, of separateness. I have to have a sense of there's majesty. I have to have a sense of there's power, there's true power. And there also can be a sense of fearsomeness, awesomeness. Not fearsomeness although that could be part of it. And so I find as I look back on this, that when we're really practicing the presence of God, the presence of God is transformative. People do not come into the presence of God without lives being changed. Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. Remember the other three that were there and saw the glory? Moses asked, can I see your glory? God said, no, you can't see my glory. You see my glory, you die. Well, can I see the backside of you? Yeah, I'll try that. Puts him in the cleft, hand over it, and walks by. And what happened to Moses after that? His face glowed so much he had to put a veil because the people couldn't look at it. Why would they not be able to look at the face of Moses? Can you look at the sun? It's the glory. It was transformative. When we really practice the presence of God, it will transform us, and we will be able to transform others. But there's a big problem that I have for myself, and it's myself. Big capital S-E-L-F. Because although I want to honor God and I want to worship God and I want to be all that I can be for God, I get in the way all the time. You know, Mimi said the other day, I forget the cartoon character, but I have met the enemy and he is me. And that is the biggest problem with me practicing the presence of God. And one day I was driving years ago, a couple decades almost ago, I lived in California. I was heading up to Lake Tahoe. It's a beautiful drive out of the Sacramento Valley, and I was going around mountains. And I had been praying, and all of a sudden, I felt this overwhelming pressure that came over me. I just felt I felt a sense of sadness, and I felt pain, and I just felt like I was hearing like people's cries supernaturally, and I had to pull off the highway. I pulled over to the side. It's a place called Immigrant Gap, and I just pulled over to a wide part of the shoulder. And I just sat there, and I put my hands on the steering wheel. I said, Lord, what's happening? What is this feeling? And he said, you've wanted to see the way I see. You asked to hear the way I hear. If you want to speak the way I speak, you got to feel this. See, I get in the way of him. He's in there, and he wants to reach the world. So I've got to die to this self that always wants to be first. And even though it shows up subtle, the key to this is like, Lord, what is the key to this? How do I really demonstrate your power? How do I practice your presence? How do I do this? Well, the answer was very simple, and we've already touched on it. Because I want people, when they see me, I want them to see Jesus. I don't want them to see me. You know, I used to say all the time, see me, see Jesus. If I'm really practicing the presence of God, you know, it's not about Dan, it's not about you, it's about Jesus that's in you. And so the answer to this is we have to love. The key is always love. Now, there's been a big problem for me for years when I think of love. We all think of love as sentimentality, good feelings, and all that. And many of us have heard that, no, the love of God, agape, and it was defined for me as the love of God in the renewed mind and manifestation. And years ago, a number of years ago, my good friend John Truitt and Lisa, and we talked, and John helped me to see that that's really not what agape is. Agape is a devotional love. Because, see, even the Pharisees had agape. And that blew my mind. Let's just go there. I ought to just throw my notes away because I'm not even going by them. Let's go to Luke chapter 11. This may be a new understanding for you, or it may be old, but this was a key for me to really get connected. I'll just give you a couple here. Luke chapter 11, verse 43. Woe to you, Pharisees, for you love agape, the best seat in the synagogues, and greetings in the marketplaces. Now, you're telling me the Pharisees had the love of God in the renewed mind and manifestation for 2 Peter 2:15. You don't need to turn there. But here's another one. It says, forsaking the right way, they have gone astray. They have followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved agape, gain from wrongdoing. Agape, the love that we have got, that God is calling us to manifest, is a devotional love. It's what do you adore? What are you totally devoted to? When Jesus said that you have got to wash your feet, the feet of others, what he's saying is you have got to serve others. That's what agape is. It's always living for the welfare and benefit of the other. Meaning, when I live genuine agape, I'm not serving self. But my problem is I love self. I love my personal peace and comfort. When I'm tired at the end of the day, the last thing I want to do is take another phone call and minister to someone else who's got needs. I'm just being honest. Right? I want to kick back and turn on the TV. Don't we all? I don't want to get in the affairs of other people. When I say I'm talking my flesh. That part of Dan that needs to die. Because getting involved with people's messy. And I don't like messy. I've had too much mess. But you know what? Jesus said, you want to serve me? You want to love me? This is how you do it. You get involved with the lives and the affairs of others. You die to yourself. And that's agape is so devoted to the other, I don't matter. What do you need at this moment that I can do for you? I really try to practice the presence of God when I'm in a conversation with someone else to really listen to them. How many times do we get in a conversation where I'm more concerned about what I can say than what they have to say? Because it's their words that will reveal their heart, and their heart is what Jesus needs me at that moment to minister to. Or when I'm in a conversation with someone, I can say, Lord, what can I learn from this person? What can this person give to me that you're speaking through them? See, to me, that is practicing the presence of God. Living a truly devotional life of loving others, of serving them, of putting their welfare first, because God will take care of me. If I live with that attitude, it's all going to be fine. But I'm telling you, it's the hardest thing for me to do. I love this story. I don't know if you've heard of a lady named Lisa Bevere. I love Lisa Bevere. And she tells a story, and I'm going to steal it from her because it just touched my heart so much. She was traveling one time, and she's got to watch my time. So she's traveling one time, and she is in an airport, and she's tired. She just came from a conference. She's been pouring her heart out. She's been ministering to people. It's time for me now, right? Well, she's at the airport, and she sees a man in a wheelchair. Elderly man, grayish hair, long, unkempt, kind of bent over, just sitting there all by himself. Everybody saw him, but nobody wanted to see him. I mean, we've all been in those situations. You see that, but no, I don't want to get involved in that. And she was just sitting there quiet, and the Lord said, go brush his hair. She's like, you're not talking to me. I don't know that. There's 50 people here. That's weird. Go brush his hair. Lord, you don't go brush his hair. Anyway, after arguing back and forth with the Lord for a few minutes, she finally gets up and she goes over and she kneels down in front of him. And she holds his hands and he looks up a little bit. And she says, sir, can I brush your hair? And he kind of like, well, yeah. And she said, do you have a hairbrush? And there was a bag on the back of the wheelchair, and she gets it out and goes through it. Meanwhile, she's just like, I can't believe you're asking me to do this, Lord. And anyway, he had long hair. She took the ponytail out and just started brushing it and undoing the snarls, and because his hair was a mess. And she got it, and she got it all clean. And then she put his hair back in the ponytail, and she went back around, and she said, sir, do you know Jesus? And he says, yeah, I know Jesus. And she said, well, Jesus asked me to do your hair. And he started crying. And he says, I've been in his wife and he were elderly. Turns out that he got hurt. And when he was hurt, he was in a rest home for his rehab, a rehab home. And his wife had to go home. And he hadn't seen his wife in 3 months. And no one had taken the time to care for him. And he was on his way to see his wife after 3 months of being separated. And he just was overwhelmed that someone would care enough to brush his hair so that he could. And I think to myself, that's my Jesus. That's practicing the presence of God. But the story gets better because Lisa's thinking, I'm done. Did a good one, Lord. One for Lisa. One for Dan. I've done that so many times. And she gets on the airplane, and she's there, and they're flying. And at some point, she gets up, and she goes to the back of the airplane. And she's there. And, they're a couple-hour flight. And the stewardess, flight attendant, I guess they call them now, comes over to her, and she says, I saw what you did for that elderly man in the airport. And Lisa's like, well, yeah, And she said, why did you do that? And Lisa took the opportunity, and she basically doesn't know what happened with the lady, but she was able to talk to her for an extended period of time about Christ as a result of the love that she showed to this man. See, to me, when we practice the presence of God by living in a devotional lifestyle of loving others like that, it opens doors like this. the world will pay attention because the world is getting colder. People are going to be more invested in themselves. And this is what God has called us to do. When we walk practicing the presence of God, we practice living love, a devotional lifestyle of serving others for the welfare and benefit of the other. Meaning I put what I need aside and I pour myself into them, knowing that God will always take care of me. Let's go to, I want to just hit a couple verses just to drive this home. Remember James 1:27, I believe it says, true religion is this. Remember that? Is what? Caring for widows and orphans. God also says, I was talking to my friend Charlie this morning, in Matthew 9, I think he said 19 and 12, 7 or 17. It was, I desire what? Mercy, not sacrifice. So many times I just want to do the sacrifice. So many times I just want to lay that on the altar. And God's like, that's not what I want. I want mercy. How do you show mercy? Mercy requires other people. Yeah, I desire mercy. Mercy means I got to be involved with other people. And so, my notes are a total mess. I hope I'm making some points here. Let's go to Mark chapter 1. I'm trying to be aware of sensitive to the time, because I know that usually the time slot for this speaker is where people are either tired or hungry or what I call hangry. And I don't want to push you guys to that point. Chapter 1, verse 32. That evening at sundown, they brought to him, Jesus, all who were sick or oppressed by demons, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. I'm sure it's hyperbole, but probably not very far off. And he healed many who were sick with various diseases, cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. And I can just imagine how tiring he had to be, too. And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place. And there he prayed, and Simon, those who were with him, searched for him. And they found him, and he said, everyone's looking for you. And he's like, well, yeah, duh. And he said, no, let's go to the next town. There I may preach, for that's why I came out. And he went through all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues, casting out demons. And a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling, said to him, if you will, you can make me clean. And I love this story because, we don't have much leprosy in America. I'm sure it's in the world. I've never met a leper. But I know that people that were leprous, whether it was actually leprosy or a serious skin condition or whatever, but that meant in that culture, according to the law, that you were unclean, right? Nobody could be in the presence of a leper. They had all their different rules. But I was reading another one of these records, and I believe it said the man was covered in leprosy. Now, first of all, for this man, that means he's ostracized from society, that he cannot move amongst any of the circles. He has to, wherever he goes, yell, unclean, unclean, so that people can move out of his way. And can you just imagine the sense of personal rejection? I mean, I hate it when people talk nasty to me, and let alone this. And so here he's physically hurting. I'm sure it's painful. He's covered in leprosy, and wherever he's going, he's got to yell unclean. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but I had heard there was even a regulation that people had to stay a certain distance away from him if they were downwind. And they had a minimum like 6-foot circle that they couldn't come within. And so here it says, now remember, I read all the rest, so you get the picture. Jesus is surrounded by a crowd. There's hundreds, thousands of people that are clamoring to get to Jesus. And it says, It says, and a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, if you will, make me clean. I can just imagine the guy, he can't hold down a normal job, so that means he's probably at poverty level. His clothing probably stinks and is rank. He's wearing rags. He's covered in sores, and he's got to fight his way through the crowd yelling, unclean, 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 until he gets to Jesus. And then he kneels down and he says, Lord, if you will. And Jesus says he was moved with pity. He stretched out his hand and touched him. He touched him. And he was healed. And it's so easy for us to love the people who love us. It's so easy to be, generous and kind to those who are my friends. But how about those that are my enemies? Or how about those that treat you despicably? How about those that cut you off? How about those that rip you off? It's no less of a requirement. If we're going to practice the presence of God, we have got to die to self, my desire for retribution, my desire to be treated fair, all those kinds of things. They have treated me unfair, but God says I desire mercy, not sacrifice. He wants us to treat them the way he treats us. And if we do that, if we can learn to really let this thing die and let Jesus live through us, then we will be able to demonstrate to the world what is holy, holy, and holy. And we will be able to move with power in this world. And we will be able to be a transformative agent for the Lord Jesus Christ, because we've been transformed. And it's just going to happen if we practice the presence of God. Amen. Thank you.